I'm excited to announce our guest speaker today, one of our fellow DNREC Division of Fish and Wildlife coworkers, Jordan Brown, our raptor, grassland, and forest bird biologist with the division. Today, Jordan and her team will discuss their work on American kestrels, which are these amazing small falcons that have been facing some pretty big obstacles. So they'll talk about how they monitor and track the movements of these kestrels that we see here in Delaware, and how a newly outfitted tower right here at the Nature Center is actually contributing to the research, which we find really neat. So Jordan and her team do some amazing work across the state. So please join me in welcoming them to our winter lecture series. And Jordan, I'll let you take it away from here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's a little bit of a bummer that it wasn't in person, as I was really excited to show you our newly upgraded Modus Tower at the DuPont Nature Center. But we still will be talking about that today and all of the technologies that we're using to track these kestrels. But to introduce the presentation and myself, today's presentation is tracking the movements of a state endangered falcon. And I am Jordan Brown. So as he said, I'm the raptor, grassland, and forest bird biologist for the DNREC Division of Fish and Wildlife. I am joined by my two technicians, Rachel Yurchison and Autumn Heil. So at a point in this presentation today, they will be taking over. So give us a little bit of leeway when we transition everything virtually. It's a little bit different than certainly coming up to the podium and taking over a presentation. So starting off, we're going to do a brief introduction to American kestrels. I think Patrick actually did a really nice job introducing them as a small falcon that we're researching, but a little bit more about our state endangered falcon, the American kestrel. They are North America's smallest and most colorful falcon. They are found primarily in grassland, pasture, agricultural fields, and other open areas, such as like early successional habitat. That is their primary habitat. They usually eat rodents, small rodents like voles and mice, but they also take large insects. We often see them with grasshoppers and dragonflies. However, they will opportunistically eat smaller birds as well as bats. So they're, like most species, they have a core diet, but they do branch off occasionally. In order to hunt these species, they do need to have a good vantage point. As you can see, they are pretty small birds, so they need to be up high so that they can look down and attempt to capture their prey. So oftentimes, where I see most people seeing these birds is actually on power lines, which this is a perfect photo to display that. They're often perched on power lines, fences, or maybe even hovering over an open field, looking for that next snack. So a little bit about identification. The size of an American kestrel is much like that of a mourning dove, so very small, can fit in your hand, much smaller than you'd think of for, if you just think of birds of prey in general. These birds have this nice gray cap and what we call mustache stripes, which run down their eyes, much like a football player might have. And the males and females are actually sexually dimorphic, which means that they have not only differing plumage colors, but they're also different sizes as well. It's a little bit hard to tell in this picture here. Other photos we have are maybe a little bit better, but the females are typically about 15% body weight larger than the males. So a pretty decent chunk, a significant amount. But males themselves are identified very easily by their rusty brown color overall. They have speckled teardrop chests, and then these slate blue wings, which you can see very clearly in this photo on the left-hand side. When these birds are flying, if you can't actually see the top of the wing, a nice, easy way to distinguish male from female is that the end of the male's tail is a fairly large black stripe with a white tip, versus when females are in flight, their tails are a brown striped color. And you can see in this photo here, the female is this you know, a little bit less exciting brown color. Has mottled wings and some streaking on the chest. So different from the male in that they have these nice prominent teardrops, and the females have this streaked breast. All right, so a little bit about their breeding and nesting habits. Kestrels breed in the spring each year, similar to many bird species that you'd be thinking of. They are secondary cavity nesters. So what this means is that they do not create their own cavities like woodpeckers, but they will use cavities that woodpeckers and other species have used for themselves. They will also use natural or man-made cavities. So this might be a building ledge or a nest box, which we will be talking about shortly. They also, interestingly, do not build nests. So we always think of birds as having these like nicely woven nests into like some sort of cup. But what they do is they use a natural substrate. So whether or not that's, you know, pebbles, dirt, or the wood chips that you can see here in our nest boxes create a nice substrate. So instead of building that nest, they take a depression. They make a nice little cup depression so that they can lay their eggs. And their eggs look like the left corner there, brown, speckled, and round. Typically, they lay a clutch or a grouping of eggs, anywhere from 3 to 7, but most commonly we see clutches of 5 here in Delaware in our monitoring program. And then once these chicks hatch, they are not ready to go out of the box like ducks are. They need to stay with their parents for a good 30 to 40 days before they're ready to go out on their own. So when they hatch, they're covered in down, completely white, super cute. You can see that in that middle photo there compared to that egg. And like I said, they stay with their parents and are fed by their parents for about 30 to 40 days. After that 30 to 40 days, they start growing their primary feathers, their flight feathers. So you'll see in that third photo on the right, a fledgling age chick. So this is a bird that is almost ready to jump out of the nest box and start flying. We've got nice breast feathers already coming in. We've got some wing feathers, but then on the top of the head and in parts of the wing, you can see the nice fluffy down white. That indicates that that bird is not quite ready and probably won't go very far if it tries to fly. But those feathers will be transitioned out with new feathers for that bird to start flying. So why are we studying kestrels specifically? I'm sure that is, you know, the burning question here, because yes, they are cute. Yes, they are awesome. And I'm a little bit biased, but why are we studying them here in Delaware? So looking at this map, this is going to tell you a lot of what you need to know. But unfortunately, kestrel populations have declined between 80 and 90% in the Mid-Atlantic and New England regions over the last 50 years. This map does a great job at showing the percent annual change of kestrel populations. Now, this map is a little bit dated, so it goes from 1966 to 2019 using breeding bird survey data, but it still is a great way to show you how populations are changing over time. So you can see here the different colors. The green colors, which is the least prominent color on this map, actually show areas of growth anywhere from 0.2 to 2% growth annually. But everywhere else, so that yellow, the orange, and the red are all indicating percent declines. So anywhere from 0.1 to over 4% decreases in populations on an annual basis. And logically, the next question is going to be, why are they declining? And that is what we're trying to figure out. So there are many thoughts to why American kestrel populations are declining, some of which are habitat loss, which we could probably say is definitely occurring in Delaware, but also predation by larger birds of prey, or possibly environmental contaminants. There are many theories, and it doesn't mean that there's a single reason why it's declining, and these reasons could be different in different regions. So we have come together across North America. We've got researchers working on this to figure out the cause for decline and figure out how to reverse these impacts. So here specifically in Delaware, following the Breeding Bird Atlas, which was in 2008 to 2012, we had a 60% decline in kestrel populations in Delaware. Following those numbers, we actually listed the bird as a state endangered species. They were subsequently added to the 2015 Delaware Wildlife Action Plan, which is a great resource that shows, what species in our state are in most need and how we plan or look to research or conserve those species. And we just recently wrote our 2025 plan, and unfortunately kestrels still are listed as a tier 1 species of greatest conservation need, which is that highest level that you can get. All right, so we're going to talk about the Delaware Kestrel Partnership. In response to the state listing of the American kestrel back in 2013, the Brandywine Zoo, if you guys are familiar, up in Wilmington, part of state parks, they joined forces with the American Kestrel Partnership, which is part of the Peregrine Fund. Some of you may be familiar with that organization. And they began installing nest boxes in Newcastle County to not only try and provide an opportunity for these birds to nest, but to also try to work on getting a monitoring program initiated. So the following year, the DNREC Division of Fish and Wildlife actually joined this effort, and we created what we now refer to as the Delaware Kestrel Partnership. So we established this in 2016, created methodology for monitoring these boxes, and kind of made strict protocols so that we could very accurately collect data and report these findings back to colleagues and share information. All right, so what we've done since then is we've continued to install nest boxes, not only in Newcastle County, but also in Kent and Sussex County. You can see a map here of our current locations. And what we're attempting to do is use our great team of volunteers to monitor these boxes every year. And when they do that, they're not only looking for nesting, but kestrel sightings to try and see if these nests are successful. And then our biologists are coming out to assess these things, trap the adult birds and chicks, and then put bands and or tags and collect information about these birds so that we can create this long-term database of knowledge and try to, get some information that we are currently lacking on the species. Some basic things that we've learned so far is that when we first began installing nest boxes, we used to put them smack dab in the middle of open fields. So in these open fields, we would have, maybe a few shrubs here and there, but a box directly in the center. We would face it, southeast and call it a day. But what we learned over time is that this made kestrels feel a little bit too vulnerable. So moving these boxes either slightly more towards a forest edge or closer to a tree or shrubby area that they could go ahead and leave the nest box if they felt threatened was actually more beneficial to these birds. So what we've done is change how we install these boxes. We put up predator guards, but we also make sure that we're not too close to tree lines, as there are predators that like to take advantage of that. So larger birds of prey, raccoons, sometimes things like black rat snakes will take advantage of this nest box. So we try not to put kestrel boxes any closer than 50 foot to a tree line. And like I said, we outfit our boxes with predator guards and try to make it as welcoming as possible. Okay, so a little bit of a season summary. So comparing the last 2 years of data, we have yet to start our 2026 season, but we are excited to do so here in just about a month, actually. In 2024, we had 81 nest boxes that we monitored statewide, which you can see this is exactly why we need a great team of volunteers, because 81 nest boxes is too many nest boxes for me and my team to monitor on our own. Great news, 21 of those boxes had kestrel sightings at or nearby them. This is a good indication that we have selected nest box locations that are appropriate for these birds, so that, you know, they're using the habitat nearby. Whether or not they use the box, it's still good information for us to have. That year we had 7 active boxes, and some of you might be thinking, wow, that's nothing. And you are correct, but this is exactly why we are looking at this state endangered species, because we don't have a huge amount of success here. And now I do want to clarify that this is just numbers from our nest box monitoring program, so it does not include anything that is nesting in man-made cavities outside of our monitoring program. And through those 7 active boxes, we had 40 eggs laid, which is a great number, and only 21 chicks. So that number is likely due to some sort of nest failure. Most often we see either predation, so through our, you know, best efforts, sometimes predators are still able to access the eggs, or possibly these birds feel threatened enough by predators outside of the nest box that they end up abandoning the nest box. So resulting in only 21 chicks that were raised. When we finish the season, we go out to nest boxes and monitor them to try and see if we can see all of the chicks that have left the box outside of the box, but that's not always possible. So what this number is confirmed fledglings is just the amount of birds that we were able to confirm around nest boxes after these birds were meant to leave. In total, we only banded 15 birds this year, and that is a number that is pretty low if you compare to the 2025 season. In 2024, we started a new program, and we're going to talk about that in just a few slides, but we had sort of a learning curve because we were aiming to go out to nest boxes a little bit later than we normally do. And because of that, we actually missed a lot of the chicks. They had fledged the nest box before we were able to get to it. So unfortunately with that, we did not get as many bands out that year, but it was still a successful year and we still had great data. In 2025, in that comparison, we had 4 more nest boxes than we did in 2024. 23 of those with kestrel sightings, so a few more. And then we had a record-breaking 9 active boxes. This was really exciting because we were once again expecting 7 active boxes, but we had a few late stragglers and were able to get data on those and band those chicks. Overall, we had 41 eggs. And then we had 30 total chicks. So once again, nest failures are not uncommon. So we ended up with 30 chicks that had hatched. We have a total of 33 confirmed fledglings. Now this number is interesting because how do we go from 30 chicks but then 33 confirmed fledglings? This is because we also took on 3 birds from Tri-State Bird Rescue and actually adopted them into current nest boxes. So we were able to confirm that those birds fledged our boxes as well. So this year was great for fledging success. We were able to confirm all the birds that we were hoping to. In total, we banded 42 birds in 2025. So, you know, nearly triple the amount that we did in 2024, and a number that's a little bit more normal for us year to year. So banding returns. So the reason why we put out those little ankle bracelets, those silver bands, is that we're always hoping that we get returns on those. So the ways you get returns are once a bird is released with a band, either another researcher captures this bird and is able to read off this band and report it to the USGS. So then you receive a report. or unfortunately, maybe you find a dead bird with a band, or these birds come back to your program and give you data on where they've been. So this is a great way to see where birds go, how old they are, get a lot of data that you wouldn't otherwise get without those unique identifiers. Some interesting data that we've gotten over the years. One of our, I believe it was a chick that we banded, one of them made it all the way down to South Carolina, which is great data. We're very happy that, it was able to migrate, but unfortunately that bird was found dead on an Air Force base. So while it's unfortunate news, we were able to see that that bird had gone from Delaware to South Carolina and know that that is, a migratory path. Some other things that we've learned is that our fledglings, so our young birds who have left the box, have dispersed from their natal home here in Delaware to eventually go to Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, most commonly. So a lot of our fledglings are going just slightly north of where they were born, but some we actually have come back year to year to Delaware, but it's really neat to see that these birds are also making their ways to other surrounding states. Nesting birds that we have gotten as adults had originally come from other states around. In particular, we've gotten Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but generally speaking, we're seeing these birds, hatch in one state locally and then return the following year to a nearby state and not necessarily that same area that they came from. In total, over the years, we have banded 243 birds. That is pretty good. This will actually be our 10th year this year as the Delaware Kestrel Partnership. So we've started very tiny back in 2016, but we have made it to band, nearly 250 birds in that time. So we're going to get into a little bit of some interesting technology, or at least I find it interesting. So this is MODIS. First, what I'd like to point out is that the picture on this slide is the tower at DuPont Nature Center that we were meant to have a field trip of after this presentation today. But hopefully you will make your way down to DuPont Nature Center later this year and see the tower for yourself. But what MODIS is, it's an automated worldwide radio telemetry cooperative research network. So what that means is it's using radio technology to track small flying organisms. So while it's really great that we can use that banding data that I was talking about in the previous slide to look at movements and look at, returns for individuals, this technology allows us to put a essentially tracking device on individuals, birds, bats, and insects, and then track them as they move around to different towers that are compatible with this technology. So rather than waiting for us to receive band reports, we can actually, relatively speaking, get live notifications of where birds ping different towers. So I'll show you a map here in just a second, but this gets us close to the real-time observations that we were hoping for. There are also tracking devices such as GPS and satellite tags that are a little bit more accurate and a little bit more real-time data. However, there are complications with how small these birds are and how large these units have to be and what we're allowed to put on the bird for safety purposes. So this was currently the best technology we had at our hands to get the data that we were hoping for. So what we're looking to learn from these tags. So we would like to improve our knowledge of habitat use throughout the state. And we're looking at not only the breeding season, but we want to know, are the migrating birds or are the overwintering birds using different habitats than what are required from our breeding birds? We realize that the habitat that they use in the spring and summer might not provide those same resources year round. So they might have to move to different habitat types as resources change throughout the year. We also are interested in individual dispersal. So this is a little bit of what I was talking about a few slides ago. So we can better understand where our, not only our chicks go after they return from their migration to enter their first adult year, but also where do our breeding pairs go when they migrate, and then any other life stage changes and maybe consistencies between areas or between broods, or maybe consistencies in male versus female. And then of course it's always helpful to understand the survival of our individuals. So this would be both adult and fledgling birds. The survival of many species, not just kestrels and not just birds, through their first year is often much lower. And once they get to their adult stage, they are usually much more successful. So looking at the success of both adult and fledgling birds as they leave the nest and prepare to migrate or not migrate, that will kind of tell us if things are happening maybe here in Delaware or along their travels, and maybe why or if they're not returning, to give us more information about their survival and when deaths occur. This is a map actually of Delaware, and I wish we would have given you an outline, but hopefully you can see that just fine. Back in 2024 is when we began implementing this MODIS technology. So we actually applied for and were granted additional funds from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Pittman-Robertson funds in order to expand our MODIS coverage here in Delaware. We were awarded $120,000, which is what we estimated would be the cost for approximately 10 towers to be installed in Delaware. The goal of this was to expand our MODIS coverage throughout the state as much as we could, and place towers in areas that didn't have coverage. So hopefully we could have no kestrels come into Delaware without us knowing about it. So in 2024, we were able to install 3 new towers. You can see those towers on the map. Those are in blue. We were able to install at Delaware Nature Society's Abbott's Mill, the Division of Fish and Wildlife's Port Penn Shop, and then the Division's Hunter Education Center at Little Creek Wildlife Area. The same year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also proposed installing 2 towers at each of their refuges, and you can see those towers in orange. So what this map is looking at is all of those things that look like little windmills. This is the coverage from each antenna of that tower and the distance that it's able to detect birds. There's a lot of information about different size antennas, different frequencies, and how much it can detect, but I won't go into that just now. Okay, so in 2025, you can see a little bit of a comparison. So the yellow represents those towers that we installed the previous year and existing towers. And then in blue, these towers the blue ones were installed in 2025. So we installed at Lum's Pond State Park, Blackiston Wildlife Area, the Laurel Fire Department, and Holt's Landing State Park. In 2025, we were also able to take the existing MODIS tower that was at DuPont Nature Center, which had not been functional for many years, and completely renovate that with new antenna, new coaxial cable, which is how the antenna connects to the computer system itself, and then a new solar panel so that it can be completely independent and function on its own. So all of these towers, like I said, were strategically placed throughout the state so that it would provide us the most coverage possible, and also areas that were suitable for towers. So areas with lots of trees like dense forest, or maybe a tower that would go in the middle of downtown Wilmington is going to be less suitable because there are several obstacles in the way for those radio signals to get through. So often areas with a clear line of sight are going to give us the best results that we can have. An opportunity to get around this is by putting some of these like antenna systems on roofs and, larger structures, but that's not always possible either, pending private land ownership and things like that. But with these towers and with a clear line of sight, MODIS receivers or MODIS towers can detect animals in flight within 15 to 20 kilometers. So that's roughly 12.5 miles. So it's got a pretty good amount of visibility and ability to detect these animals as they move through. Okay, so aside from tower placement and learning about this technology, we also had to decide what type of tag we were going to be using for our birds. Through the recommendations of other colleagues who were already doing this, we selected the Cellular Tracking Technologies hybrid tag. So this lightweight tag is not only battery operated, but it does have a tiny solar panel on it, which helps with the longevity of this tag. So it's a great tag because kestrels, while they spend the majority of their time out and about in open areas where solar power would be very suitable, they also do spend a decent amount of time within cavities, especially during the nesting season. So we wanted to make sure that if we put out these tags, if there are longer periods of time where these birds will not be in the sun, that we would have battery power to continue to operate these tags. Through other projects, we were able to determine that these hybrid tags would last, in some cases, more than 3 years, because we've had colleagues with data for 3 years for birds. And that was great because that is roughly the average lifespan of a wild kestrel. So we're hoping to target, that entire life's movements. The tags themselves, you can see, sit on the back of the bird, so they act a little bit as a backpack. The way that we put these on is we actually attach them underneath the wing, so we have a separate piece that forms as a backpack, and it's a 3D printed harness, and we use little clips at the tag base to form these loops that go around their wings. So that way it allows the bird to continue to be mobile and doesn't, cause any issues for flying, for breeding, or for hunting. And then sitting on the back, that tag is able to get the most solar power that it can. As far as safety purposes for these birds, we never want to put anything on any wildlife that is going to upset the norm or prevent them from, living, eating, or functioning. Through this, through all of our permit rules, we are limited to adding things on their body that are more than 3% of their total body weight. Our tags weigh just under 3 grams. So that's a pretty tiny lightweight tag, but kestrels themselves weigh somewhere between 100 to probably 140 grams at, the highest. So we're looking at only being able to attach these tags on birds that weigh more than 100 grams. Now, we talked about previously, males are a little bit smaller. We actually have a separate harness for males and females so that it can snugly fit onto them so that it doesn't fall off, it doesn't cause issues. But another problem we run into is that younger male birds sometimes aren't heavy enough to receive a backpack. So in some cases, we might have more females receiving tags than we do males. And then let's look at our deployment over the last 2 years. So in 2024, like I said, this was that learning curve for us. We weren't able to put as many tags out as we hoped, but we were able to get 14 birds tagged that first year. 6 of these birds were adults. There were only 1 male and 5 females. So we usually try to get a half and half male and female when we do projects like this. But the way that we're trapping these birds, at least during the breeding season, is we're targeting them while they're incubating in the nest box. Typically, and especially during the first part of incubation, the female is doing most of this work. We are sometimes lucky to get a male who has swapped out with a female, but this explains why there's a lot more adult females that were tagged than males. Only 5 of those were nesting birds. We did trap another bird on roadside. I believe that was during migration season in 2024. So we did want to shout out that we also got one bird that was not a nesting bird, and we will continue to target those. The other 8 birds were all chicks. There were 3 males and 5 females. Likely in this case, we were limited to the amount of chicks that we had access to since we kind of missed the window that summer with birds leaving a little bit early, but we were still able to get 8 chicks, 3 males and 5 females. And in 2025, we were able to get 25 birds. So at this present moment, we have 39 total birds tagged and hopefully providing us data. 11 of those were adults. There were 4 males and 7 females. 2 of those birds were trapped outside of nesting boxes throughout the year. And then there were 14 chicks, a nice even distribution of 7 males and 7 females. This is the year that we had 3 foster chicks from Tri-State Bird Rescue that we were not only able to help rehome after they were rehabilitated, but also were able to put these tags on these birds to track their movements and potentially their survival after being rehabilitated. Okay, so at this point, I am going to stop yapping and I am going to turn things over to Autumn Heil, who will give you a little bit of an introduction as to how this technology works and then look at some really cool detections that we've gotten throughout the last 2 years.
Hello, everyone hear me? So I apologize because I think this picture is covering up something else, but just a little bit of information about how MODIS tags work, because there's a lot of pretty intricate, exciting science that goes into the making of these little tiny tags. As we stated before, a lot of them are battery and solar powered. Some of them are just battery. They come in a variety of different shapes and sizes depending on what the project is and what species they're going on. So like we said with Kestrels, ours are about 3 grams. I believe the smallest tags, which are called nano tags, can be as little as 0.13 grams, which is about 130 milligrams, which is pretty tiny because we put them on species as small as butterflies and dragonflies to track their movements and migrations, as well as bats and a variety of different bird species up to raptors. So each tag has a unique ID, which is how we are able to identify the specific species and the specific bird that we're placing them on. So each MODIS tag emits a unique frequency. Each MODIS tag uses radio, so similar to the radio that you would find in your car or like a handheld radio. They emit these radio waves in really quick pulses that are about 20 milliseconds, and they're emitted at different intervals. So each of these pulses creates almost like a unique code, kind of like the way that you would hear Morse. Within these pulses are they come in spans of bursts, and then that combination of frequency creates the unique identification that we would then use to identify our birds. So each MODIS tower or a receiver has antennas that detect these radio frequencies. And when a bird such as our kestrels pass by, the sensors are able to pick up this unique ID. It then goes to our sensor station, which passes it on to modis.com, who then makes the data readily available for us to see the time that the bird came by, the date, and then also the tracking it between different MODIS towers as it moves. So just as we have a couple very exciting stories of where our kestrels have been. This is a path of one of the adult female kestrels that we had roadside trapped in December of 2024. You can see on the map, there is a dark green path, and this is the path that the bird would have taken as its northerly route heading into New Hampshire to breed. So unlike most birds, as you would know, they travel south for the winter. Kestrels are unique in that they practice leapfrogging. So birds that would breed in northern states would end up in Delaware, and birds that are breeding in Delaware will often end up down south. So this bird it was trapped in Delaware in December, and we didn't get any detections until about April of 2025, when she was suddenly picked up and started heading from Great Cypress Swamp up to Wilmington over the course of about 4 hours. In the same day, she was then picked up in Western Connecticut around midnight, which is a pretty incredible trek for a bird to take. The next day, she continued flying north, making her way to Western Massachusetts before arriving in New Hampshire on the 22nd. She then spent her breeding season in New Hampshire, mostly outside of Modus range, so we don't know exactly what she got up to. She remained undetected until about October 8th, when she began to fly south for the winter. Most recently, she has been detected as of Tuesday in Great Cypress Swamp. So this bird continues to be very active in the area, and we're excited to see what she gets up to this summer. So for southern birds, this is where our foster chick comes into play. We had originally banded this bird July 8th, 2025. It made its way to Richmond, Virginia, and it was then picked up 5 days later in South Carolina. There, you can see in the map, there are quite a few gaps in the range of the Modus towers, so we're not sure exactly where these birds end up. But then, so there were no detections until about October 14th, when he then arrived in Gainesville, Florida, continuing down to Bowling Green, Florida. So we're extremely excited by our first ping tower in Florida. It's, I believe, the farthest south that we have seen our birds travel. So additionally, we have a female chick that was banded from a pretty late surprise box on DWL property around August 7th. She stayed local until August 23rd, when she pinged a tower outside of Maryland. Through late September and early October, she spent her time along the coast visiting Ocean City, and between October 9th and 16th, she went undetected, similarly in that kind of open expanse of no towers. She consistently started pinging on a string of towers before moving inland and arriving also in Florida 5 days after the other foster chick had. All of our kestrels, they have been detected by 82 different receivers within 14 states. On this map, you can see the different green dots. The ones that are a brighter, like more neon green, are the ones that are detected more frequently. And as they start to kind of dilute in color, those are the ones that are not as actively pinged. So very highly centered around Delaware, as you would expect, but also picked up by a lot of other towers within the area. We also have a total of 41 different species that have been detected by towers within the state of Delaware. So each one of these, it's a little chaotic map, but each one of these lines represents the path of a different species that has been picked up in the state of Delaware, which is pretty incredible, the amount of travel that some of these birds have gone on. But with that, I'm going to pass it on to my coworker, Rachel, who will be filling in a little bit more information about all of these different species, specifically the ones that are at our tower.
Awesome. So next we'll break down the species that have been detected at the tower at DuPont Nature Center. As far as this tower is concerned, as Jordan mentioned, it was originally installed in 2017, but then fell out of repair, and now we have brought it back onto the online, and combining those two sets of data, this location has picked up 148 individual birds spanning across 8 species, one of which is our kestrels. But oftentimes when you go visit the nature center, you're looking for lots of shorebirds. So they have picked up many shorebirds. So one of the first species that we'll talk about is the ruddy turnstone. This was represented by 10 individuals picked up at this tower. These birds take their first flight when they're around 19 days old and fly thousands of miles from the Arctic Circle to their non-breeding grounds, basically a couple days later. To make things harder, these birds are doing this without their parents, and because they have already left and they have to make the first migration all by themselves. Next, the red knots. 120 individuals, so a large majority of the birds that have been pinging this tower were red knots, traveling as far away as French Guiana in South America to northern Canada, but they stop over in Delaware to feast on horseshoe crab eggs. Nearly 90% of the entire population of the subspecies rufa of the red knot can be present in the Delaware Bay in a single day. So having these areas protected on our Delaware Bay are very, very important for this species. Next, some sanderlings, 11 of them, one of which came through via Puerto Rico. Non-breeding sanderlings often stay on their wintering grounds through the summer, saving energy by avoiding the long trip back up to their Arctic nesting grounds. Only 3 Dunlin have been detected by this tower, but they have also pretty well traveled, coming up from South Carolina, but making their way up to Upper Ontario, where there is a bird sanctuary up at that very, very top tower there. Dunlin were added to the IUCN Red List in 2021, given their populations, their wintering grounds in the United Kingdom have massively decreased. They've declined by 20% globally since the early 2000s. So it's a very steep drop that they are experiencing. Semi-palmated plovers. There is a single one of these birds that was originally banded in South Carolina, but has made its way to Delaware. Their bill, even though it's super really tiny, is stronger than you might think. They sometimes use it to hammer into rocky sand and gravel, trying to probe for food. Another semi-palmated bird, the sandpiper. 2 individuals that were banded in New Jersey were pinged at our tower there. During migration, some semi-pollinated sandpipers double their weight, getting up to like 50 grams, which is pretty heavy for a bird that size. So they can have enough energy to fuel their 2,000-mile long nonstop flight. And lastly, the last species that was detected by this tower was a salt marsh sparrow. One individual that was banded in southern Georgia. A big reason for decline of these species is sea level rise, so high tides and storm surges that are flooding their nesting habitat, and that low reproductive success is the primary reason for their population decline. Of course, we want to give a big thank you to the people that people and organizations that made our MODIS program work, from funding to installations to being able to pick their brains about various aspects of this. We greatly appreciate their help. And if you would like to get involved with any of our programs, the Kestrel monitoring season is right around the corner. Our first training is next week. So if that's something that you're interested in joining us, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can kind of get you on board and signed up for a training and things like that. If we also have opportunities for our volunteers to observe banding. So of course with our Kestrel program, but we also monitor barn owl boxes. We mistnet for songbirds. So we have opportunities for volunteers to observe that. Our peregrine falcon fledge watch happens typically around Memorial Day if they are on time. Last year they were, 2 years ago they were a little late. But the peregrine falcon nest box in downtown Wilmington usually has chicks that are ready to take their first flight during this time. We have volunteers stationed in the area to make sure that they are watching these birds to see if their first flight is a successful one, if they end up on the road, making sure that they're not injured by cars in a very hectic scenario in a city. So those people are really important from dawn to dusk, monitoring these birds for about a week until these birds are more comfortable flying around the city. And finally, our Hawk Watch program, which takes place September 1st through November 30th, has 2 locations, one at Ashland Nature Center and the other at Cape Henlopen State Park, where volunteers watch the skies for migrating raptors making their way south for the winter and kind of keeping data as to what species are being seen as they make their way south.
I want to again thank you guys all for joining.
Thank you so much for having us out. This was great. And hopefully we'll hear from some people for volunteer work.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think everyone now can see the Modus Tower right behind us. Will be a good reminder for everyone of the great work y'all are doing right here in our backyards.